Have you ever felt like your entire life could change in a single night? Sophia, a young nurse exhausted and invisible to the world, was shivering alone at the bus stop after yet another suffocating overnight shift. She had no idea that, in that very moment, a luxury car would pull up in front of her, and that the man behind the wheel, a powerful CEO with a mysterious past, would say just 4 words that would change everything: "You're coming with me." But what started as a simple act of kindness quickly spiraled into a tangled web of secrets, loss, betrayal, and maybe love. This is the story of how 2 wounded souls found in each other the strength to be reborn, and how one unexpected encounter could rewrite both of their fates. Stay with us till the end, because this story will tug at your heart, take you by surprise, and maybe, just maybe, remind you that no one is ever truly alone in this world. If this story grabs you from the start, hit the like button, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our emotional stories. So let's begin. Sophia's life was an emotional roller coaster that never seemed to slow down. Each day brought new challenges that pushed her to the edge. 3 years ago, she had walked away from her dream of becoming a doctor to take on the responsibilities fate had cruelly dumped on her fragile shoulders. Her mother, Maria, had been diagnosed with a degenerative illness that slowly drained not just her physical strength, but also every bit of the family's savings. The medical bills piled up like an avalanche, and Sophia found herself stuck in a vicious cycle of exhausting work and mounting financial pressure that gnawed at her soul. Every morning she woke up feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her, wondering if she'd have the strength to face another day in that uphill battle. At the hospital, Sophia was known as the most dedicated nurse on the night shift, but also the most overworked. Her co-workers admired her boundless compassion, but few knew that behind her quiet strength was a 26-year-old woman barely scraping by, struggling to pay the rent of the tiny apartment she shared with her ailing mother. Overtime wasn't an option, it was a necessity, and every double shift stripped away another piece of youth she'd never get back. The sparkle in her eyes had faded, replaced by the quiet weariness of someone who knew sacrifice far too well. Exhaustion had become her constant shadow, and the smile she offered to patients was often the only one she could muster all day. Theodore Sinclair, on the other hand, lived in a completely different world, one where financial success couldn't fill the emptiness echoing through his soul. At 34, he had built a business empire that many envied, but for him, it felt like a golden cage, locking him away from real life. His days were a blur of meetings, million-dollar deals, and hollow dinners in upscale restaurants where shallow conversations took the place of real human connection. The success he'd once chased turned out to be a cruel illusion. The higher he climbed, the more disconnected he felt from the humanity he once knew. His mansion, though grand and impressive, echoed with loneliness. The only footsteps he heard were his own, wandering hallways that had never known the warmth of family. The tragedy that broke Theodore happened 5 years earlier, when his younger sister Isabella died in a car crash, one he still blamed himself for not preventing. She had come to him for help, asking for funds to support a community project that fed underprivileged children. But Theodore, focused on profits and afraid of risks, had turned her down. Desperate, Isabella found other investors, less trustworthy ones, and it was on her way back from a dangerous business meeting that the fatal accident happened. Ever since, Theodore carried a guilt that burned through him like acid, turning every career milestone into a bitter reminder of how he'd failed her. No amount of money could bring Isabella back, and deep down he knew it. Theodore's nights were haunted by nightmares that replayed that fateful day over and over again, jolting him awake in cold sweats. He'd shut himself off from deep relationships, building emotional walls that protected him from more pain, but also from joy. Every time he tried to get close to someone, his fear of losing them pushed them away. Work had become both his refuge and his curse, a way to stay busy so he wouldn't have to face the void Isabella's absence had left behind. He'd seen countless therapists paid top dollar, but none had been able to break through the fortress he'd built around his heart. Sophia, on the other hand, had learned to bury her own dreams in order to care for others. She had mastered the art of hiding her pain behind a calm, nurturing exterior, offering comfort to patients and families, even as her own heart bled in silence. Her childhood friends had gone on to graduate, get married, and build the lives she once dreamed of. Meanwhile, Sophia was trapped in a cycle of never-ending responsibility. Her loneliness was a quiet ache. Unlike Theodore, she hadn't chosen solitude. She was surrounded by people who needed her, yet no one truly saw her. Romantic relationships were rare and short-lived. Most men weren't willing to share her attention with a sick mother and a demanding job that left her drained. Their meeting wasn't just coincidence. It felt like the universe had carefully orchestrated a moment where two broken people might find light in each other's cracks. Sophia had spent so long caring for everyone else, she'd forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. And Theodore had closed himself off so tightly, he'd forgotten what it meant to care at all. They both carried guilt, hers for not being able to heal her mother despite all her sacrifices, his for not saving his sister when he had the chance. Their pain had different roots, but shared the same depth, forging a quiet understanding between them that went beyond words. What they didn't know yet was that their two seemingly opposite worlds were about to collide, and it would test not just their hearts, but their ability to trust in love again. Sophia's financial reality was a constant nightmare, one that kept her awake during the few hours she had to rest between shifts. Her mother's medical bills were an emotional weight she carried like a boulder, and every month was a painful calculation of which bills to pay now and which to push aside. Her fridge was often empty, a cruel reminder that her dedication to others came at the cost of her own survival. She had developed a heartbreaking talent for making miracles with what little she had, but even miracles have limits, and Sophia felt like she was nearing hers. Pride kept her from asking for help, and responsibility kept her from quitting, trapping her in a life that felt more like a prison. Every smile she forced at work was a mask, one that barely covered the rising panic inside her chest. Meanwhile, Theodore had learned that not only did money fail to buy happiness, it could actually deepen loneliness when used as a shield against genuine connection. His wealth had become a curse, attracting people who wanted something from him, while pushing away the few who might have loved him for who he truly was. In an effort to honor Isabella's memory, he donated millions to charity, but every signed check only reminded him that his generosity had come too late. His nights were consumed by overwork, a desperate attempt to drown out the silence that brought back memories of conversations he'd never have again. The success he had built now felt hollow, like a castle made of ash, one that stood tall over the ruins of all he had lost, and he couldn't help but wonder if all that ambition had been worth the cost of his soul. If you're into stories that pull at your heartstrings, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Sofia Maria Santos carried in her name the legacy of a family that had once known better days, a family fate had pushed far beyond any human limit. Born in a tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city, she grew up watching her mother work tirelessly as a seamstress after her father walked out on them when she was just 8. Even as a child, Sophia had a natural compassion that made her cry when she saw injured animals or witnessed any kind of suffering around her. Her brown eyes, the same as her mother's, always held a depth of emotion that left both adults and classmates quietly awestruck. She was the kind of kid who preferred helping others over playing, the one who shared her lunch with hungry classmates and was always the first to comfort someone in tears. During her teenage years, Sophia stood out as one of the top students at her public school, not because things came easy to her, but because she had a work ethic carved in steel. She'd studied deep into the night, fueled by determination and the unshakable hope that education could be her way out. Her teachers saw enormous potential in her and often encouraged her to dream big, talking about colleges and careers that seemed light years away for a girl from her background. Sophia held a secret dream of becoming a doctor, not for the money or prestige, but because she wanted to heal people, to give hope back to families like her own. Her nights were a blur of textbooks and odd jobs, sealing envelopes, mending clothes, anything to help her mom cover the bills. And still, she clung tightly to the belief that all that sacrifice would eventually lead her to a better life. At 18, when she finally landed a partial scholarship to study medicine, Sophia believed every ounce of sacrifice had been worth it. Life finally seemed to be heading where she'd always dreamed. The first 2 years of med school were the happiest of her life. She excelled not just in academics, but in kindness, treating classmates and professors with a gentle sincerity that left a lasting mark. She juggled classes, intense study hours, and a part-time job at a pharmacy. It was exhausting, but she managed to stay afloat and still send money home. Her classmates respected her deeply, aware that she had to fight harder than anyone else just to be there. Her dream of becoming a pediatrician felt within reach. For the first time, Sophia felt she was truly building the life she had imagined. But fate, cruel and relentless, had other plans. In her 3rd year of med school, her mother Maria began showing strange symptoms: hand tremors, trouble speaking, and a growing weakness that was initially blamed on exhaustion. With what little medical knowledge she had, Sophia urged her mom to see a specialist. The diagnosis hit like a freight train: ALS, a progressive, incurable neurodegenerative disease. The doctor delivered the news with cold, clinical detachment, explaining that Maria had 2 to 5 years left and would need expensive specialized care. Sitting in that hospital waiting room, clutching her mother's trembling hand, Sophia felt her world collapse and realized she'd soon face the hardest decision of her life. The choice to drop out of med school didn't happen overnight. It took weeks of sleepless nights and frantic calculations that always led to the same conclusion: impossible. The medical bills mounted like an avalanche, and even with basic health insurance, the cost of specialized care was astronomical. Sophia tried everything. She applied for full scholarships, reached out to distant relatives, even looked into better-paying jobs she could squeeze in between classes, but reality always crushed her heroic efforts. Her mother, sensing the burden her daughter was carrying, begged her not to give up on her dreams. But Sophia had already made up her mind, heartbroken. It wasn't really a choice. She couldn't live with herself if she didn't do everything she could for the woman who had sacrificed everything for her. The day she withdrew from med school, Sophia cried harder than she ever had in her life. It felt like she was burying not just her dreams, but a part of herself that would never come back. She enrolled in a technical nursing program, a faster track that would allow her to start working sooner with a modest income that could at least cover her mother's treatment. Her former med school classmates were shocked. Some tried to talk her out of it. Others offered financial help, which her pride wouldn't let her accept. In nursing school, she stood out for her strong theoretical background, but each lecture was a painful reminder of what could have been. She forced herself to find purpose in her new path, telling herself she could still care for people, still make a difference in the lives of patients and their families. Over the years, Sophia developed an almost supernatural ability to compartmentalize her pain. She created a professional persona that radiated strength and compassion, all while hiding the shattered heart beating quietly beneath her scrubs. At the hospital, she became known as the nurse who never lost her temper, who always had a comforting word for distressed families, who treated every patient like they were her own. Her co-workers admired her dedication, but few knew she cried silently in bathroom stalls during breaks, fighting off the bitterness that threatened to eat her alive. She'd learned to smile through the pain, to cling to tiny moments of joy amidst the chaos. But deep inside, there was always a lingering sadness for the life she could have had. The hands that once dreamed of performing life-saving surgeries now offered basic care, but every gesture was filled with love. Sophia's daily routine had become an exhausting dance between the hospital and home. Every minute was meticulously planned so she could give her all, both to her patients and to her mother. She woke at 5 every morning to prepare breakfast and meds for Maria, making sure everything was in order before heading to work. At the hospital, she gave it everything she had, often volunteering for extra shifts when the staff was short, knowing that every extra penny made a difference. No matter how drained she felt coming home, she still found the strength to help her mother with physical therapy, prepare her meals, and sit with her to talk about the day. Her only real moments of rest were when Maria finally slept. And even then, Sophia stayed up researching new treatments and therapies that might slow the disease. She had become a model caregiver, but at the cost of forgetting entirely how to care for herself. What made Sophia truly extraordinary was her ability to find beauty and hope even in the bleakest situations, a quality that made her magnetic to those around her. She had a rare gift, making terminal patients laugh in their final days, comforting grieving families, and inspiring colleagues who were losing faith in humanity. Her eyes, though heavy with all she'd witnessed, still lit up when she talked about small victories at the hospital or precious moments with her mom. Sophia had developed a deep emotional wisdom that didn't come from textbooks, but from surviving each day like a battle. She understood the fragility of life in a way few ever do, and that made her not just an exceptional nurse, but someone whose soul touched everyone who truly got to know her. That week started particularly cruel for Sophia. A glitch in the hospital's inventory system sparked an internal investigation, and Karen Mitchell, the head nurse who had long resented Sophia's popularity among staff and patients, wasted no time casting suspicion her way. Karen slyly hinted that the discrepancies in the controlled medication logs might be linked to the few nurses, like Sophia, with privileged access. Her venomous words slithered down the corridors like smoke, planting seeds of doubt among co-workers who had once trusted Sophia completely. She began to feel the weight of suspicious glances, hushed conversations that stopped when she entered the room, polite smiles laced with mistrust. The emotional toll of having her integrity questioned was unbearable. Her honesty had been one of the last things she could hold on to, and now even that was under fire. Meanwhile, in Theodore's corporate world, a quiet storm was brewing. His longtime friend and minority partner, Marcus Holt, began publicly questioning his leadership. Marcus had been whispering among investors that Theodore was losing his edge, blaming his recent surge in charitable donations for declining profit margins. Board meetings turned into minefields, every word weighed, every decision dissected. Theodore began to realize Marcus was building support to challenge his authority, using his generosity as ammo against him. The betrayal stung, especially coming from someone he'd trusted so blindly. It cracked open old wounds about loyalty and trust, forcing Theodore to wonder if anyone in his life truly cared about him, beyond what his bank account could offer. Back at the hospital, Sophia's situation kept spiraling. She caught Karen deliberately sabotaging others to make herself look indispensable. She saw her accidentally skip critical medication updates, confuse shift schedules, even hide equipment, all to paint other nurses as incompetent. Sophia's conscience wouldn't let her stay quiet. But confronting Karen directly could backfire in ways she couldn't afford. Each day felt like walking a minefield where one wrong step could ruin everything. She became hyper-aware of every move she made, afraid of giving anyone more reason to doubt her. The constant tension was wearing her down, affecting her focus, and she feared that might impact the one thing that still gave her a sense of purpose: patient care. At the same time, Theodore uncovered something even darker. Some of his closest employees were leaking confidential project details to competitors, not just business strategies, but even his philanthropic plans. Rivals twisted those details to craft a narrative that Theodore was buying goodwill to distract from shady business practices. He had to bring in a corporate security firm to investigate his own team. It made him feel like a stranger in his own company. Paranoia crept in. Every email, every meeting, every whisper felt suspect. The isolation that had always shadowed him now felt suffocating. Even the people who'd worked beside him for years could no longer be trusted. and it was starting to take a toll on his mental health. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching this story from? The invitation came as a text message, written with a formality that clashed with the warm memory of their last encounter in the pediatric wing. Sinclair Foundation Charity Ball. I'd be honored if you were my guest. Sophia read those words at least 10 times before replying. A mix of curiosity, anxiety, and insecurity stirred in her chest. This wasn't the kind of event she felt comfortable attending. The world of the wealthy made her uneasy, but there was something about Theodore's quiet kindness that made her want, for the first time in a long while, to step out of her routine and allow herself to experience something different. On the night of the event, the simple rented dress she wore felt like a flimsy disguise among the luxury surrounding her. The ballroom gleamed with gold, crystal chandeliers, and rehearsed smiles. She barely recognized her own reflection in the tall mirrors. When Theodore found her near the entrance, his eyes lit up in a way no one had ever looked at her before. "You look perfect," he whispered, and for a second, the world went still. But even with that compliment hanging in the air, Sophia felt unsteady, like she was just a visitor in a universe that wasn't hers. During dinner, she tried to smile, sit up straight, and appear at ease. But the sharp-tongued comments from a few socialites at the table, cloaked in politeness yet cutting like glass, struck her hard. "Do you work with him?" one asked, raising a brow. "A nurse?" another repeated, as if it were an eccentric quirk on Theodore's part. Sophia gripped her napkin tightly, reminding herself to breathe. She felt like an outsider in a movie set, where every detail was designed to show she didn't belong. At one point, Theodore stepped away to speak with investors, and Sophia escaped to the garden outside the ballroom. The cool air helped hold back the tears threatening to spill. For a moment, she thought about leaving, going back to her usual discomfort. At least there, she knew how to survive. But before she could slip away, he appeared beside her, saying nothing. He just sat down quietly, offering her the kind of silence that comforts instead of oppresses. "They don't know who you are, Sophia," he said gently, "but I'm starting to understand." That night ended with a shy dance beneath the soft lights of the nearly empty ballroom. With no one watching, Sophia finally let herself relax, resting her head on his shoulder, forgetting for a while about the pain, the bills, the hospital. But it was a peace she didn't know how to hold on to. The next day, back on her shift and facing the same suspicious glances from co-workers, it all felt like a distant dream. Theodore's messages came often, but she took longer and longer to reply. She was confused. Getting too close to him felt like she might lose herself in the process. For Theodore, that night had meant more than any social event. It was the first time since Isabella that he'd let someone break through his emotional walls. Seeing Sophia there, out of place yet brave, stirred something he had buried deep. But the business world didn't pause for emotional awakenings. The following day, an emergency board meeting revealed that Marcus had secured support from 2 key advisors. The war for control of the company was about to escalate, and Theodore couldn't afford distractions. Still, he found himself thinking about her more than he should, and that scared him. Sophia, too, wrestled with guilt for allowing herself a moment of beauty amid so much chaos. Her mother had fallen ill that same night, and the caregiver had rushed her to the ER. When Sophia got home, Maria was sleepy, but smiling. "You looked so beautiful, sweetheart. I saw you in the photos on the nurse's phone." That whispered compliment, spoken through medication and weakness, pierced Sophia's heart in the sweetest, most painful way. She wanted to live up to that pride in her mother's eyes, but she had no idea how to balance so many worlds without breaking. And then, right in the middle of that emotional storm, a new player entered the story. During a late-night hospital visit, Theodore had an unexpected run-in with another CEO, Richard Langford, a longtime rival in business. The tension between them was thick. Richard made snide remarks about Theodore playing savior with nurses, while flashing Sophia a look of interest she immediately noticed. Theodore's possessive glare said more than words, revealing something even he wasn't ready to admit. But what Sophia didn't know was that Richard had a deeper connection to her life than anyone could guess. That day the hospital felt different. Theodore showed up early in the morning, dressed in a slightly more casual suit, carrying a cardboard box filled with small personalized gifts for the pediatric wing staff, handmade candy, engraved mugs, handwritten notes. No one quite understood why a billionaire was walking around handing out treats like a regular volunteer. But when they saw the way he looked at Sophia, many began to realize it wasn't just philanthropy, it was personal. Sophia watched from a distance, unsure of what to feel. Part of her wanted to run to him, thank him for thinking of everyone. But another part remembered the judgmental stares at the charity ball. She didn't want her life turned into a spectacle. When they finally crossed paths in the hallway, she clutched her clipboard so tightly, her fingers turned white. "What are you doing here?" she asked softly. "Trying to return the favor," he replied, his voice sincere. "For what you did for me, without even realizing it." After that, Theodore started visiting more often, always quietly. Sometimes he left coffee at the reception desk with a note. Other times he'd show up at the end of her shift, just to make sure she didn't walk home in the cold alone. At first, Sophia tried to keep her distance. She was scared of relying on anyone. But over time, she realized those gestures came with no strings attached. They were simply there, like a blanket that didn't need a thank you to keep someone warm. One especially brutal night, after they lost a child to a sudden infection, Sophia called Theodore without thinking. She didn't ask for anything. She just said, "Can you just listen for a minute?" And he did. He stayed silent on the line for over an hour while she cried, vented about life's unfairness, and admitted how much she hated feeling weak. When the call ended, Sophia felt like she had taken off armor she didn't even realize she was wearing. For the first time, someone had taken care of her. On a rare free weekend, Theodore invited her to visit a children's shelter he'd secretly funded for years, but never had the courage to enter. "I always thought I couldn't walk in without thinking of her," he confessed, referring to Isabella. Sophia stepped inside the small house with peeling paint and worn toys. And in the kid's eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. Raw, real hope. Watching Theodore kneel down to talk to a little girl with pigtails, no suit, no pretense, was like watching an old wound slowly begin to heal. She started noticing the little things about him that no one else seemed to. How he avoided windows on rainy days. How quiet he got when he saw siblings together. How lost his eyes became when talking about the future. Theodore wasn't just a brilliant businessman, he was a man full of hidden cracks, like her. And in that reflection, Sophia saw herself. It was strange, but with him, she could finally breathe. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to prove anything, but not everything was simple. One evening, as they sat quietly on his couch, music playing in the background, Theodore's phone lit up. He looked at it, went pale, and quickly silenced the call. Sophia noticed. "Who was it?" she asked. He hesitated, then lied. "No one important." But his expression said otherwise. And in that quiet lie, the first real shadow crept in. Not because of what he said, but because Sophia had heard that kind of lie before, too many times. In the days that followed, Theodore seemed distant, still present, but more guarded, as if something or someone was pulling him away. Sophia found herself wondering if she really knew the man she'd let into her life, if those kind gestures were hiding parts of him he wasn't ready to reveal. And yet, something in her couldn't walk away. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was intuition, or maybe she already knew this story hadn't shown its true face yet. Then came the rainy night. Sophia was closing up the medication cabinet at the hospital when a nurse rushed in. "There's a man asking for you in the lobby. He's hurt." Her heart jumped. She hurried to the front and found Theodore, his shirt torn, a gash over his eyebrow, panic in his eyes. "Sophia, I need your help, But you can't tell anyone you saw me here. And in that moment, she knew. His ghosts were about to knock on her door too. Let us know in the comments if this story has you hooked. Sophia took Theodore to an empty restroom and patched him up with trembling hands and confused eyes. He avoided looking directly at her, as if each glance were a question he wasn't ready to answer. "What happened?" she finally asked. He hesitated. It was a warning. That was all. Then silence. But Sophia wasn't the kind of woman who stayed quiet out of fear anymore. "From who?" she pressed. He didn't answer. He just looked at her, guilt, pain, and something that felt dangerously close to goodbye. That same night, after he slipped out through the back door like a ghost, Sophia knew something bigger was coming. And it did. 2 mornings later, Karen showed up in the nurse's station with a smile that made Sophia's blood run cold. "Admin needs to see you. Urgently." The walk to the director's office felt like a death march. Inside, she saw 3 department heads, stacks of paperwork, and the director's hardened stare. "There's evidence you've been diverting controlled medications. We want your side of the story." The ground vanished beneath her feet. Sophia tried to speak, to defend herself, but the documents were there. Spreadsheets, photos, tampered access logs. She knew instantly Karen had framed her. But how could she prove it? Unable to breathe, she signed a document placing her on temporary suspension. She left the hospital in a daze, her folded uniform in her arms, feeling like the entire world had collapsed. On the sidewalk, she cried harder than she had since leaving med school. It felt like everything she had fought for was being ripped away, mercilessly. No warning, no chance. Theodore didn't return her calls. He didn't reply to any of her messages. The only response came in the form of an anonymous envelope slipped under her door. One line, written in red ink, "Stay away from him, or it gets worse." And just like that, her world, already in ruins, grew even darker. That same night, her mother suffered a respiratory crisis. Sophia was forced to beg for help at the very hospital that had just cast her out. Only one nurse, a friend, agreed to help her discreetly. The humiliation cut so deep, Sophia started to believe that maybe disappearing would be easier. While she was gone, Karen took over the night shift and wasted no time spreading her version of the story. According to her, Sophia had been secretly dating a powerful businessman who helped her cover up the thefts. She traded principles for luxury, people whispered in the hallways. Sophia heard about it from a former colleague who still respected her. "They're destroying your name, Sophie." But what hurt most wasn't the rumors. It was Theodore's silence. That silence screamed. Across the city, Theodore was fighting his own war. Marcus had launched a surgical financial sabotage. Stock plummeted, contracts collapsed, creditors came knocking. Then came the final blow. Marcus appeared on national TV, on a business program, subtly suggesting that Theodore Sinclair was involved with a nurse accused of hospital theft. The scandal exploded online. The image of the secret couple went viral, and Theodore, faced with cameras and furious shareholders, simply vanished. The next morning, a car accident was reported. A black luxury vehicle had gone off the road and flipped near the city's edge. No body was found, only blood on the steering wheel and Theodore's documents on the passenger seat. Sophia watched the news frozen, her breath caught in her throat. The world kept spinning, but everything inside her stopped. He was gone. At the very moment she needed answers, support, love, he had disappeared. For days, Sophia drifted in a silent grief. She didn't know if she was still living or just continuing out of habit. The hospital made her dismissal official. Her mother's health declined. Bills piled up. No news stations mentioned the crash anymore. It was like Theodore had been erased, like he had never existed. Until one cold night, just like the first time they met, someone knocked at her door. No one was there, only an envelope. Inside, a handwritten note. "If you want answers, go to the old hotel on Holloway Street." "Come alone!" Sophia stood, holding the envelope for minutes, unable to move. Every line in her life seemed to lead to this moment where pain and fear melted into something new. Courage. She knew she couldn't run anymore, that some bigger truth, maybe devastating, and was waiting. And still, she went. Because deep down, what she feared most wasn't danger. It was discovering that the love growing between them had been a lie all along. The old hotel on Holloway Street looked abandoned for years. Broken windows let the wind whisper through the halls like forgotten stories. Sophia stepped inside, her footsteps silent, her heart pounding in her throat. The letter trembled in her hand more than her body. In the lobby, a tipped-over wheelchair, a shattered chandelier. Time had stopped there, or maybe it had been waiting for her. Up on the second floor, a door hung slightly ajar, dim light leaking through, and behind it, Sophia saw something she would never forget. A tall man in a wrinkled suit, unshaven and bruised, was tied to a chair. His lip was bleeding, his eyes were sunken but alive. It was Theodore, alive, hurt but alive. Beside him, an unconscious guard, signs of a struggle. "Sophie, you came?" he murmured, voice hoarse. She rushed to him, untying the ropes with shaky hands. He pulled her into an embrace, even through the pain, and whispered, "I knew you wouldn't give up on me." But before they could say anything else, footsteps echoed down the hallway. They hid behind the door. Two armed men swept the floor, searching. Theodore whispered quickly, "They're Langford's guys. He wants to silence me. And now he knows you're involved too." Sophia held her breath. There was no time to think. She helped him escape out the back, running across the empty street to an abandoned construction site. There they found temporary shelter. And in the fear and relief of that moment they understood. They were in this together now. There was no going back. In the days that followed, Sophia became a nurse, an investigator, a strategist. With help from a trusted friend, she hid Theodore in a cabin far out in the countryside. Meanwhile, she made it her mission to prove her innocence. She searched through files, dug up old records, confronted former colleagues, until she finally uncovered a forgotten email thread between Karen and an outside vendor. It revealed Karen had been manipulating inventory orders for months. That was the crack in the armor, but accusing Karen outright would be risky. So Sophia and her friend Julia staged a new fake report, baiting Karen into making a mistake. It worked. During a meeting, Karen used forged documents Sophia never submitted. It raised red flags with legal. Days later, Karen was suspended pending internal investigation. Sophia wasn't in the clear yet, but the game had changed. Back at the cabin, Theodore was healing. His body was slowly recovering, but his spirit felt broken. "They destroyed everything, Sophie. My company, my reputation, and almost you." She took his hand with the same gentleness she gave every patient and said, "They didn't destroy who you are. They just forced you to remember it." He smiled weakly. "And what if I'm not the man you once knew?" She squeezed his hand tighter. "Then I want to meet the man you've become." Their time together created a new kind of intimacy, not built on luxury, but on quiet moments, on nights where Sophia read to him by the fireplace, mornings where he brewed her coffee the way she liked, even with his hand still in a bandage. It was love growing from rubble, like a flower pushing through stone. For the first time, Sophia felt like she wasn't the only one doing the caring, and Theodore learned what it felt like to be loved without having to hide his scars. With a clearer mind, Theodore finally told her everything. Langford, his longtime rival, had lost a major merger to him and wanted revenge. He used Karen as a mole, promising her a high-ranking role at one of Langford's companies. The car crash had been staged with help from an old contact in Theodore's private security. He had to disappear for a while, but the plan spiraled out of control. Sophia listened quietly, absorbing the web they had both been caught in. But even as he revealed everything, one question still burned in Sophia's heart. Why me? Why had he involved her? Why didn't he push her away from the start? Why let her face everything alone when he could have protected her? Before she could ask it aloud, he looked her in the eyes and said, "Because you're the only real thing that's happened to me in years, and if I pushed you away, I'd have nowhere left to come back to." But what he didn't know was that there was still a truth Sophia herself had yet to uncover, one that would change everything next. Help this channel grow. Don't forget to hit subscribe. The old phone in the cabin rang in the middle of the night, its metallic chime slicing through the silence and jolting Sophia awake. Theodore, still half asleep, tried to stop her from answering, but it was too late. On the other end, a woman's voice, cold, measured. He hasn't told you everything, and if you stay by his side, you'll fall with him. Before Sophia could respond, the line went dead, but something about that voice felt familiar, too familiar. The next morning, shaken, Sophia followed a gut feeling and went through the old wooden box her mother kept tucked away in the closet. It was one of those mornings where silence feels like a warning. Among utility bills and old test results, she found a letter, yellowed with time, smelling of dust and memory. The return address on the envelope, Sinclair family. Her heart stopped for a second. Inside was a handwritten letter from a woman named Elizabeth, Theodore's mother, and what it said was devastating. Years ago, Sophia's grandfather had been a partner in a chain of community clinics with Theodore's grandfather. After a bitter legal battle, Sophia's family was pushed out through manipulation, forged accusations, and shady deals. The inheritance left behind had been hidden, funneled away, leaving her mother Maria in poverty, unaware that she was cut off from a fortune that rightfully belonged to them. But the biggest shock, the letter revealed that Sophia was the rightful heir to 40% of the Sinclair Foundation, and her mother had kept it secret to protect her, to keep her from the same world that had destroyed their family. Shaking, Sophia left the cabin without saying a word. She drove downtown to the old city records office and asked to access archived files about the foundation. And there it was, documents, contracts, quiet changes to the board structure over decades, signed by people long dead. It was real. She wasn't just part of Theodore's story, she was part of the origin of everything. When she returned to the cabin, her world was spinning. How could she tell him? Worse, how could she trust someone who might have unknowingly benefited from the injustice that had destroyed her family? That night, she confronted him. "Did you know?" she asked, her voice low but firm. Theodore frowned. "Know what?" She tossed the papers onto the table. For a moment, he was silent. Then he said, like the words burned in his throat, "No, but I suspected. I always felt like there was something buried beneath the foundation. My father mentioned it before he died, but I never dug deep enough." His eyes filled with guilt. "I didn't want to know. I ran from it." Sophia's pain was silent, like a fracture spreading beneath the surface. "My mom lived in poverty. She sewed to survive. And this fortune, this life, was locked away by lies your family upheld." He stepped closer. "Sophie, just listen." She pulled back. "I don't know who you are anymore, Theo. I don't know if I ever loved you, or if I was just another piece of your guilt." He didn't respond, because in that moment he didn't know either. But before that silence turned into a permanent goodbye, something unexpected happened. Sophia got a call from the hospital. Her mother had gone into cardiac arrest. The news hit like a lightning bolt through her chest. She ran. Theodore wanted to come, but she stopped him. "Not now." Maria was stabilized, but doctors warned the next episode could be fatal. At her bedside, Sophia cried quietly, holding the frail hand of the woman who had hidden the biggest truth of her life. "You knew?" she asked softly. Maria nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I just wanted you to be free." That same night, a dossier was delivered to the door of the cabin where Theodore was hiding. Inside were undeniable proofs. Langford had orchestrated Theodore's kidnapping and was involved in a global money laundering scheme using shell companies linked to the sabotage of the Sinclair Foundation. The signature on the last page? Marcus Holt, the former partner. Theodore stared at the envelope, torn between rage and hope. If it was legit, it could not only clear his name, but expose the man who had nearly destroyed the woman he loved. And so, for the first time since the staged crash, Theodore stepped out of hiding. He knew now this wasn't just about him. It was about Sophia, about Maria, about the parents who were betrayed, and about a love born in ruin that maybe, just maybe, still had a chance to bloom. He didn't know if Sophia would ever forgive him, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't run anymore. The abandoned Sinclair Foundation headquarters was the perfect setting for a reckoning. Grey walls, dusty windows, empty halls. Theodore arrived on time, holding the dossier Marcus had sent, and a heart pounding like a war drum. Langford waited in the main room, flanked by 2 guards, his eyes calm, smug. "I see you survived the accident. Shame, really," he said, adjusting his cuffs like they were discussing business. But this wasn't business anymore, this was personal. "You destroyed lives, Richard, and you thought you'd walk away clean." Theodore's voice echoed through the chamber. "You stole everything, but this is where it ends." He slammed the folder on the table. Pages spilled out like sentences, forged contracts, wire transfers, incriminating emails. Langford flipped through the papers with practiced boredom. "Oh, Theo, you made a better ghost." But when a third man entered, a federal prosecutor, the arrogance drained from Langford's face. Marcus followed behind in handcuffs. "Your former partner had a change of heart," the prosecutor said, "and he decided to talk." As Langford was led away, shouting threats and protests, Theodore stood still. The victory felt bitter, a justice delayed and far from complete. He had won, but at the cost of everything: his company, his mind, and Sophia. She wasn't there. She had refused to be part of the plan. "I need time to think," was all she said before walking away. Now, in the silence of the building where his empire began, Theodore understood something he hadn't before. He wasn't fighting Langford. He was fighting himself, the man who let it all happen, a man who now had to learn how to live again. Across the city, Sophia sat with her mother in the hospital. Machines beeped in slow, cold rhythms. Maria's eyes moved with effort. "You have to forgive," she whispered, clutching her daughter's hand. "Not for him, for you," Sophia cried in silence. She was tired of carrying rage, doubt, fear, but still, she didn't know how to let it go. "He hid so much." Maria squeezed her hand. "But he's the only one who stayed." And in that moment, something inside Sophia broke and came back together all at once. She stood. She had something to do. Hours later, she arrived at the Sinclair headquarters. Theodore stood alone in the hallway, staring at an old photo of his sister in a chipped frame. When he saw her, his eyes filled with shock and hope. "Sophie!" She didn't speak. She walked up to him and stopped inches away. "I didn't come here for you. I came for me." He nodded, honoring the space she still needed. "I want to start over, but on my terms, with what's rightfully mine, and with no more lies." Theodore looked at her like he was seeing sunlight after years in the dark. "Then let's start over." The new board of the foundation was formed in record time. Sophia took her place as rightful co-founder. At the first meeting, she wore a simple blazer and an unshakable expression. She presented a project to expand affordable clinics, focused on caregivers and single-parent families. Theodore sat beside her, not as CEO, but as support. The silence between them no longer held pain, but possibility. It was the start of something new, and for the first time, shared. That same week, Sophia's mother passed away. She died peacefully after watching her daughter finally rise. Confident, fulfilled. Grief came like a calm storm, a hollow space filled with gratitude. Sophia didn't fall apart. She cried, yes, for many nights. But between those tears, she felt something she had never known before: peace. Because at last, her mother had left knowing her daughter had broken free from the pain generations before her had carried in silence. Days later, on the rooftop of the old Sinclair Holdings building, Theodore took Sophia to the place where he used to go to think. With the city at their feet and the sky awash in orange, he got down on one knee. No ring, no fanfare. "I don't have anything left to give you, except who I really am." Sophia's eyes welled up. She smiled, softly, sadly. "Then maybe, for the first time, that's enough." They embraced. not as two people starting fresh, but as two souls closing a cycle and bracing for whatever came next. But just as peace began to settle in, something shattered the stillness. An envelope was delivered to the foundation, no return address. Inside, a single handwritten sentence in red ink: "This isn't over. Leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe to the channel." The weeks that followed the confrontation were quiet, but intense. The threat in that final envelope hung over Sophia like a storm cloud, but she made a choice. Fear wouldn't guide her anymore. For the first time, she used her story as power, not pain. She took charge of the foundation's new branches, restructured contracts, fired corrupt staff, and launched a scholarship program for women caregivers. "This isn't charity," she said in meetings. "It's justice." And people listened, because her presence now filled every room with conviction. Theodore, on the other hand, stepped away from business for a while. He began spending time at the same community centers he used to only fund. He served coffee, packed donation boxes, and listened to stories from single mothers and lost youth. There he learned that presence meant more than power. At night, he wrote letters to Sophia that he never sent. Confessions, childhood memories, pieces of his soul. It was his quiet way of getting closer again. He knew he'd have to rebuild her trust, not with promises but with time. Their relationship became something delicate. There were no labels, no guarantees, but there was exchange. Sophia called him after tough meetings. He showed up unannounced with food for the foundation's team. Sometimes they sat in silence for hours. Other times they argued, still healing open wounds. But with every encounter, one truth lingered. They weren't who they used to be, and maybe that was what made them possible. One day, Sophia received an invitation to represent the foundation at an international conference on compassionate healthcare. Seeing her name printed on the envelope, she thought of her mother. "She would have been so proud," she whispered, eyes misty. Theodore encouraged her to go. "You were born for this." She smiled. "Are you coming with me?" He hesitated, then answered, "No, I think this victory should be yours alone." And in that gesture, there was more love than in 1,000 declarations. He was finally learning not to take up space that wasn't his. At the conference in Paris, Sophia gave a keynote speech that ended in a standing ovation. She told her story without romanticizing the pain, but celebrating the strength that rose from it. She spoke of her mother, of dropping out of med school, of the foundation, and she ended with a line that moved the entire room. "Life didn't give back what it took from me. It gave me something new, and that's what I choose to live." From that moment on, she wasn't just a nurse or an heir. She became a symbol of resilience and transformation. When she returned home, there was an envelope on her desk, the handwriting unmistakable. It was from Theodore, just one page. "I didn't know how to love until I lost you, and now maybe I know just enough to walk beside you, even from afar, even in silence." Sophia cried as she read it, not from sadness, but because she understood now. Love isn't possession, it's freedom. And she knew no matter what, he was still there, in the quiet grace of her choices. One late afternoon, Sophia visited her mother's grave. She brought flowers from the community garden she helped plant. She sat quietly on the grass. "You taught me how to be strong, Mom," she whispered. "But I had to break to learn that being strong also means knowing when to ask for help." She smiled, gazing at the crimson sky. "And strangely enough, he's the one who taught me that." A soft wind swept through the trees like a whisper of reply, and in that moment Sophia knew she was ready for the next chapter. At an emergency board meeting, Sophia announced the foundation's expansion into 5 new cities, prioritizing underserved regions. Everyone applauded, but she looked toward the back of the room where Theodore stood silently. Their eyes met. He smiled. She smiled back. And in that shared glance, they exchanged an "I'm here," a promise stronger than any formal vow. A new pact, without fear, without chains. But that night, while reviewing project reports, Sophia found something unsettling. A contract signed by a name she hadn't seen in months. Karen Mitchell. The blood drained from her face. A new role at a partner company. A company with ties to Langford's old group. The past wasn't gone. It was watching. She stared at the document like it was an old wound, still open. It couldn't be a coincidence. The partner company had been formed only months ago, based offshore, with quiet links to Langford's old empire. Sophia felt her stomach twist. She had two choices: pretend she saw nothing, or investigate. And this time, she didn't hesitate. She chose the truth. She ordered a discreet audit and froze all payments connected to the contract. Rumors began swirling behind closed doors. She's too young, too paranoid, they said. But Sophia was no longer the nurse who flinched in fear. She endured tense meetings, public questions, even veiled threats. But she stood firm, because now she knew her worth. When the final audit came back, the revelation hit like thunder. Karen had been using a shell non-profit to siphon off charitable funds. The news spread fast. Karen was arrested, and her corruption exposed a broader network involving other former Langford allies. Once again, Sophia had stood against an entire system, and won. But this time, she didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She simply exhaled, feeling the weight of responsibility and freedom. For the first time, she wasn't just reacting to the world, she was reshaping it. That same week, Sophia received a white envelope with no sender. Inside, a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The photo showed her, Theodore, and Maria sitting in front of the cabin, laughing like a family. Below it, handwritten in ink, "This story was always yours. Thank you for letting me be part of it." She smiled, tears welling up. She knew it was from him. And even if they weren't officially together, even if life pulled them in different directions, one thing was certain: he would never truly leave her. At the Foundation's annual closing ceremony, Sophia stepped onto the stage wearing the simple necklace her mother gave her when she got into med school. She spoke about dignity, about women who hold the world together in silence. And in the end, she left the room in tears when she said, "What defines me isn't what I lost, or even what I gained. It's what I chose to do with it all. And today, I choose to love who I am, scars and all." As she stepped off the stage, Theodore waited, holding a bouquet from the community garden. No fancy roses, just sunflowers, lavender, and daisies. "You were shining up there," he said, his voice tight with emotion. She smiled. "So were you, even without the spotlight." He took her hand but didn't say anything. Neither did she, because sometimes, when two souls have already recognized each other, silence is enough to promise what words never could. In the garden of the Foundation, children played, patients laughed, and mothers sipped coffee with dignity. Sophia watched from a distance, feeling her mother's presence in every gesture, every project brought to life. What began as a ride on a cold night had become a movement, a revolution of care, of real love, of a reunion with the woman she always was, but never had the chance to be. And it all started with a man who stopped his car and said, "You're coming with me." Sophia knew more challenges would come. The world would still test her strength, but now she didn't walk alone. She had a voice, a purpose, and deep roots. Fear still existed, but it no longer ruled. And as she watched a new generation walk into the clinic, their eyes lit with hope, she whispered to herself, "This is where my story begins again." Have you ever helped someone like that? Or been helped when you needed it the most? Tell us your story in the comments below. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this one. Because sometimes, all it takes is one simple gesture to change everything.